Maimonides and Rambam come to be what some may call a mirror. Different people, different groups look at the Rambam and they see themselves, their own reflection. Now, everyone wants to adopt the Rambam as theirs. How did that develop over time?
That's an enormous question and an excellent one. I think it started with his own authority in his own lifetime, meaning he was a great scholar in his own time, extremely highly regarded in his own time. He also produced a massive amount. He didn't just produce, in essence, everything he did was revolutionary. For instance, as I mentioned before, he was the first to author a sort of a total commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah Torah itself was revolutionary in the sense that it was even a legal code, let alone the way he did it, and that it encompassed all of Jewish thought and ritual and life, including things that were not pertinent then, meaning something related to the temple service, with the temple no longer in existence. His philosophical texts, and he had other treatises. The Guide to the Perplexed is only one, the sort of the major philosophical text, but he had others. So these are things that today, in the modern world, we would compartmentalize. We would say, okay, somebody is an expert in one particular field, but they would not be an expert in the various, across fields. But in his own time, he was, in essence, this great figure and a profound intellectual who I'll mention again, though, was also a committed communal leader. So anything he wrote, even when there was opposition, like how we started this, had to be not just consulted, but contended with, in essence. I think what you really are touching on, though, is what is referred to as reception history, which is how something is received, and then what happens. It sort of takes on a life of its own. In which case, you have copies of something, and then they are copied, and if they are highly regarded, and then you have commentaries on a particular text, that is, in essence, it snowballs, and it gets greater and greater. Now, the interesting thing about the Rambam is that you could generally say about reception history, well, at some point, something just sort of, the influence wanes. And in Maimonides' case, it did not. It does get back to your question, the previous question about, well, are his medical treatises still relevant? So no, not exactly, not in that way. But halachic texts and philosophical texts remain, there's a profundity there. Now, taking this into the modern world, though, I think with this reception idea is that who ultimately claims, let's say, who ultimately will adopt the Rambam has an influence as to how it will then be propagated. So, for instance, today, in our own time, we see, on Hanukkah, we see menorot all over the world, Chanukiot all over the world, with the straight arms like this. Now, this is a Chabad practice. This is why we see it all over the world. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, had, in his view, this was the way the menorah was supposed to look. It's based on a famous image, which is in a manuscript of the commentary on the Mishnah, which is today housed, presently kept by the Bodleian Library in Oxford, but today, actually, right now, is in the exhibition at the Yeshiva University Museum, where this menorah, possibly in the hand of Maimonides, appears in this straight armed. Now, Menachem Mendel Schneerson was one of the most influential Jews of the 20th century, of the modern period. So had he not found a particular affinity, or had an affinity, particular affinity for the Rambam, we might not be seeing Chanukiot like this all over the world. But in addition, in the 1980s, Chabad instituted this sort of daily study of the Mishnah Torah. So the specifics of that I don't think are particularly relevant, or particularly not necessary to go into, as much as the recognition that when we're looking at reception, who has influence and how they appreciate or ultimately propagate a particular idea, I think is crucial here. And the Rambam is somebody who had such vast knowledge and ultimately produced a vast amount of material that over time, anyone could look at the Rambam even as things were changing, social and political change in the modern world. Still, people look to the Rambam. In the 20th century, you find innumerable images of the Rambam, where now artists are taking this up. There's a way to trace this back too into the 18th century, but once it sort of appears once and then another time, it can snowball, I think.